A lot of food because we have breakfast and we have
You have,
lunch.
did you print up
So we're
the
saving
recommendation
cocktails.
report?
Yeah, cocktails later.
You do.
Yeah.
Any big school board changes in the election?
No, it's not a local election year.
Sorry?
It wasn't a local election year.
Okay.
Oh,
no.
I thought it said by district.
There were a couple that have May elections still, but, it was only if there was a vacancy on the
Okay.
board, so, no.
For next year's figure.
Yep.
Great. Happy birthday and.
Thank you.
Oh, happy
Happy
birthday.
birthday.
Happy birthday.
You're bringing that up, please.
Yeah.
Major change in position, Lisa? You're moving to that side of the table?
I think I sat on this side once before. Trying to keep it even. All right, you're all set to go.
Okay, you're ready to begin. So welcome, everyone, and thank you for being here, either in person or online. And we have breakfast and lunch, so the online people, if you can, race over and get a little refreshment, it's just fine. And people that are here are gonna have to eat a lot. Anyway, hope everyone had a wonderful Thanksgiving, and thank you for being here today to go over the final report of the task force. Andy and I and Michelle, who is line, are very anxious to hear your recommendations and bring some closure to the report, hopefully, and move forward. As you know, Jeff Curry will no longer be the co-chair of the Education Committee. Jennifer Leeper will be the co-chair along with Douglas McCrory. And Jennifer is very aware of the Special Ed Task Force, et cetera. And so I'm sure this will move forward in, the same way. She was vice chair of the task force to begin with. So, vice chair of the Education Committee. So that's where we are. I'm saddened that we've lost Kathleen McCarty, who was the ranking member on the Education Committee, also a very big proponent of getting special ed right. And I'm sorry that she was not reelected. We'll miss her very much. But at any rate, I'm very grateful to all of you, and certainly to Andy for taking a crack at the draft of this.
Well, I want to say that this draft report is a conglomeration of the recommendations of the subcommittees. In our findings report, we broached a whole lot of other issues and some much bigger issues, which are not contained here, including universal pre-K. And moreover, personally for me, I'm very concerned about the fact that although we are spending an enormous amount on special education, the achievement gap is not diminishing in any way. And we're not really addressing that. And we have a wild shortage of special ed teachers, of related service providers, of para educators, even more so. And we really don't address those issues. So while we can go through and wordsmith this document, we ought to all, I would like to spend some time thinking about whether there are other things, bigger things that we can actually agree on making as proposals. personally. Secondly, the findings report was a really comprehensive document covering the waterfront. This is a fairly skeletal additional document. I'm open to suggestions as to what else we might want to put in here if there are other things. But you know, in my mind, the issue is, you know, do we want to say something bigger, bolder? Do we want to, or are we satisfied with this as the level of recommendations we want to make? Not to say that the ECS, I mean, the ECS is big. That's a lot of money. But beyond that, it's fairly limited. So how do you want to proceed?
Well, I guess first I'd like to proceed with what's in here and see if there are changes or further recommendations to what the subcommittees put forward. And then I have a couple of things also that I'd like us to just think about as, but after we've talked about these.
There are two comments that came by email. Mike Grove had a comment, a substantive comment, and Patrice had a substantive comment. I don't see Mike on with
No.
us. Why don't
Mike is unable to be here.
let's resolve Patrice's issue first, if we can.
Well, I actually had two observations. One is in number 2,
Under
finance recommendations, item 5. I don't recall us talking about the auditors reviewing the finances of the RESCs. And since they are public bodies, their finances are already available for public scrutiny.
I would agree. I think the way that this was written with the RESCs and the apps that talked about together, it seemed like if somebody didn't know what they were reading, that RESCs were private. So I think we need to go through and look at where we connected those two, that the RESCs are a public institution, so it's not the same as the approved privates.
Fran has a document here from one district showing the year-to-year increases in costs. And the only thing what sticks out is that the increases are far higher for the RESCs than they are for the absent. And so if the concern is that somehow, money's being misspent or somebody's gouging, that concern for the APSEPs, for the RESCs, is the same concern as for the APSEPs.
So let me just, this just came in from one district and I'd like to keep that anonymous, but this was just something that was shared with me. And I'm so sorry, guys, I don't have it to share with you online. But what it is I can speak to it. There were 22 students. No, I guess it's more than that. There are 41 students that are mentioned here. And it charts the increases from 23-24 to 24-25 for the same students placed in the same places, okay? And I'll just give you some examples, all right? In the first 15, no, I'm sorry, the first 20 are at a RESC, ACEs. And the increases, and I don't have all the information here, certainly, but the increases are, from 10% or 3% all the way up to 68% for one student. It went from 86,000 plus to 146,000 plus. There was one from 92 up to 153. There was one from 140 to 176. There was one from 103 to 132. And so what they're saying is, what the superintendent is saying, and others, this was submitted to me, but I have heard over and over and over again from superintendents that the increases are just crazy. And that they can't keep track of them from year to year. And, you know, they don't know what those increases will be. And then it sends the budget into turmoil. And so I just wanted us to be aware of that. And it doesn't appear here. This is a very small subset of one district, but it doesn't appear here that those increases are limited to the private institutions. They're also limited to the rests. And so I think, you know, I understand where districts are, and I'm sure Leslie can talk to it too in Hartford, where we're unprepared. We can't be prepared for that type of increase in the budget when the budget's already been passed. So, you know, Leslie, did you want to add anything to that?
It is so hard, nor do we have the capacity to monitor the increases within our budget, right? I wish I had additional staffing just for that, Fran, to be able to do the analysis, and to have the people at the table to say yes or no on the increase. So it's not just about the uncertainty that it creates for the budget, but it's also, right, for programming and forecasting internally as well.
It's an issue. And, you know, I have heard it, I would be remiss in not representing the superintendents at this table because, like I said, this is one example, but I talk to superintendents all the time in area groups, and they're always telling me that the increases are more than they can handle. And like Leslie said, you know, there's a million things going on in a school district, as you all know. They don't have the time to sit down and figure out each and every one and why they increase. They end up paying it. And, you know, we're just, that money has to come from someplace, is what I'm saying.
I don't think I heard that people were disgruntled that this was an idea. It was so much, it was included in recommendations as if we had already discussed it, which we hadn't.
Okay.
So have no problem, but they have to be distinguished so that people who read this who are, you know, not, I would actually say, even in the legislature.
Yeah.
No,
That's why
maybe
I said that.
especially in the legislature. And honestly, this document says a lot, and I would suggest that as a committee, we, with your resources, get a large sample of this where we could look at rest, that we could look at all the private placings and just show. Of course, this doesn't say like, did any services change? It's very hard to say like, was there any change?
I
in
have
the
no
IEP?
clue.
But that's my point, is that the controls aren't there. And we were just talking last time, I think even Andy had said that, you know, the more things we put in terms of like salary increases for aides or paras, the private sector has to adjust as well. And so I think it's an important document for people to see, like, this is how much money we're talking about. We also have to recognize there are variables that can't be controlled for, but if it goes up over 10% in the middle of the year, it's gonna destroy budgets, and we're gonna have to ask for it, I'm on Board of Ed, from the town, and we don't know why. And so I think it is important for it to be said, but we probably should wordsmith it such that it's a distinguishable entity or entities.
Well, I want to say a couple of things about this. In terms of finances, the current state regulations for approval of risks require the APSEP to provide financial information. And so that information is in the state now. I don't know what they do with it.
Andy, you said for the approval of the risks, but then you switched.
I'm sorry, for
You
the
meant absent.
APSEPs. I'm talking only APSEPs.
Yeah.
That the APSEP guidance, the APSEPs regulations require the submission of financial information. And so that does already exist. One. Two, if we're talking about auditing, what's the standard? You know, you got to audit against something. You can't just say, you know, audit without providing standards as to what's appropriate, what's inappropriate. So I'm not I am not at all in favor of this particular recommendation, the way it's now worded. I think we need, I think a lot more work needs to be done before we can come up with a scheme where we actually can have some sort of state-based cost control on private placements.
Could I ask a question simply because I don't know the answer and maybe somebody in this room does? You said that the private providers have to submit budget information in order to get approved.
No, it's the annual.
It is annual, okay, that was my question.
I just wanted to mention, I think it was a comment that Jason made that, the reason for the increases is unknown. While that may be true sometimes, the information that's lacking here is, did a student go into crisis and now requires 2-to-1 staffing? And so there will be people on that planning and placement team that know that. It might not get trickled up to the superintendent, but certainly the public school district is part of that team and will be part of that decision-making process. So, and we don't have that information. And sometimes the increases are made regarding budget, in response to budget, but sometimes they are made and sometimes changed in the middle of the year, depending on the needs.
So I'm just going to take this a little bit further. So for instance, one of the things that we saw in one particular place is that there was an increase in the use of paraprofessionals. Well, the district, that's true, we do come to these meetings. However, we're heavily reliant, we're not in the buildings every day, so we're heavily reliant on the information that's coming from the school. I will tell you, because there continued to be this increase, we actually went to go visit. I wanted to see how this increase of paraprofessionals was being utilized. In this particular instance, this is a child who actually, during that period of time, was not utilizing the paraprofessional, was actually going off campus without a paraprofessional. And we're trying to figure out, even sitting there with our own team being there, why are we making this recommendation for a child who clearly wasn't using it during the day? So my point in saying that is that we're not in the buildings every day. So we are reliant on the information that's coming from the schools to tell us these increases. So just the notion of monitoring on the back end of how dollars and cents are being utilized, we don't have the capacity to really monitor the recommendations that are being made and how they're being utilized. It's just that it's blindly open and yeah, okay, you said that you need this and you need that, and then we're just paying for it because God forbid, we don't want to disrupt the placement. But I will tell you, even as we were doing the same kind of analysis that folks were doing in this one particular school, I'm like, well, what's going on? Same kid, same service. There were increases, but we saw the increase in the recommendations for paraprofessionals for particular kids and just trying to get a sense of some of those kinds of things. So I think that, right, we do sit at the table, but we're not in buildings every day. So we have to try to figure out how do we balance this out. So it makes sense on both ends.
Oh, look, I'm hearing a lot about what's wrong with the current system. What do we do that actually can fix this?
Is somebody?
Amy has her hand up.
Amy.
Thanks. I think one of the things that would be helpful, and I know that this is what is really difficult for districts, is having the increased number a lot sooner, right? We develop our budgets by December, right? My budget's already set for next year, but I don't know increased percentages until October of next year. So I assume a 2% increase, but when you have any school that's increased by 5 or 10%, that's all unaccounted for. So it's not necessarily the day-to-day IEP increases because those are all unknowns. It's when you know that you're going to have an increase in your rate the following year. And that's both for RESCs and APSEFs. I think that's something, to answer your question, Andy, is very controllable. If we can set some type of timeline that says districts are informed of rate increases by January 1st of the year prior, or something to that effect, I think that would be really helpful for districts to be able to budget and project a lot easier for the following year. There's always going to be some give and take, but if you have some sort of ability to project, it will make those budgets a little bit easier and a little bit more reliable.
Well, before we go to Catherine, I'd like to hear from APSEFs and the rest about whether how do you respond to that kind of idea?
Yeah, Amy and I have had this conversation too offline, and I totally understand the place that districts find themselves in when I know I can speak for my program, let them know, very late in the year. That's when our program, when our board approves the budget. On the other hand, there would be still a number of unknowns by January 1st. So what's our workers' comp insurance going to be? What's our health insurance going to be? We could estimate, and so I imagine that approved privates would estimate, give an estimate kind of on the high end.
Right.
And then go with that. You know, if that helps, I think that we would be open to that.
Yeah, I would agree with what Karen's saying. We go through our budget process for our programs, at least at CREC. I can't speak to all the rest, but everyone has a different budgeting process later in the year. And so I mean, we certainly aren't letting districts know in October. We're letting them know in the spring when the budget's approved. But we could do estimates. I think that is a feasible recommendation around how do we think through estimating for districts prior to their budget season, because it is a hard job.
But what Karen said, which, you know, I hear loud and clear, is that if you're going to estimate early, you're going to estimate high.
I mean, and there's any number of factors that may still be in process. Bargaining unit contracts that are going to impact the cost for paraprofessionals, like, you know, the same things that districts have, we have on our end that, you know, are going to be factors depending on what gets negotiated.
But
Oh, Catherine.
Catherine's
was
next.
first. Yep,
All right, wake up, Catherine.
yep, Catherine's first.
Sorry, I didn't really have anything important to say. I was trying to understand the issue a little more. So what I was trying to understand if the different time frame is because are the RESCs and the APSEPs, are they able to be more flexible or more responsive to different, you know, different factors in terms of staffing or, you know, able to attract staffing in a different way? So I don't know if that was just a factor in the budget setting. But it sounds like not.
I don't understand the question, Catherine. Could you maybe say it another way?
Yeah, I think that was a nice educator's way to say that. Thank you. I just threw a couple things out there and thought, hope someone would hook into one of them. No, I was just trying to understand why the timeline is different for these folks setting their budgets. And I wasn't sure if part of the appeal of having a timeline that wasn't set as far out in advance as like Amy is saying, is that they're able to be more responsive to the workforce demands and maybe they're able to, you know, kind of figure out what the workforce demands are and that be more responsive to them so they can attract more staffing, for example, like.
Yeah, so I'm not the CFO, but you know, what I have learned over years of working with her is that I think her perspective is the more quarters that we can get through in our fiscal year, the more accurate our projections are going to be for the upcoming year. And so she likes to delay it. I mean, I think Catherine in part too, like the workforce who's leaving, who's staying. And Benhaven is a 12-month program, so it's a little bit different from other schools. But I think that's her perspective. Having said that, you know, I want to honor her perspective. I see that that's true. The more information you have, the more accurate it will be. I still am not opposed to having an estimate, you know, earlier in the year.
I guess for me, the estimate I think will help is one part of it, but I'm trying to determine like what's reasonable, right? If there's rate increases, like what are we basing those on? And I get, you know, if there's particular students who require something else, but just a flat tuition, looking at what the increases are over a period of time, when you were saying about 2%, if it's been 8%, it's been 11%, what's the standard and where's the similarities across the board? I know that each approved private in RESC are different and have some different service needs or service offerings, but really just trying to understand what's reasonable, right? If this place is servicing this student profile, why are they charging this and why is this one charging this? And really trying to understand those pieces. So yes, the estimate would help, you know, especially with budgets, but also just trying to figure out what's reasonable.
Lisa?
Yeah, I was just actually thinking along the same lines as you, Tiffany. I think that we're answering two different questions, right?
Right.
One is predictability of budgeting for school districts. And then the second thing is the year-over-year annual cost increase and the lack of data and information that would allow individuals to actually look deeper into what's going on. Because right now we don't, like, this is great. We don't have this for every school district. And I too, like Fran, have heard from many superintendents. Of course, you hear from all of your superintendents, but just the year after year after year, 10%, 20% increase, that it's unsustainable for districts, period, to fund. And so like, I think that if we're going back to number 5 here on number 2, it could, if we want if the group would like the audit of the private facility, the rest should be a separate item because they are a public, and reading this number 5, they're lumped together with the privates in a way that we should just disentangle.
Well, you're the budget analyst of the group, obviously. How do we determine reasonableness? Who determines reasonableness? What's the standards for reasonableness? Is there a system we can recommend that can look at that question of what's reasonable?
Those are all good questions, Andy, and just a question, I don't see Brian here, but like, shouldn't the State Department of Education has a lot of information, okay? We only see what's publicly available, and right now I will say there's not a lot that's publicly available. All we see is total charged in terms of tuition, rather regular education and special education. So like, there's no information that would allow any individual from outside the department to analyze and at least look at general trends. The definition of reasonable, I don't think we're gonna determine here around this table, right? Because it's all individual to the student. But if there's no information at all, God bless you, then you can't even ask the question. You can't even analyze and try and dig out. Should the State Department of Education put more information out publicly that would allow individuals to look and you're not even gonna get to the heart of why these increases are the way that they are though. But if the State Department of Education sees something that is unusual, should they at least look into it?
What are they looking into? I mean, look, you have a private school that has staff and other costs and a whole array of costs.
Yeah.
And what is the matrix against which they're comparing that to see whether those charges are reasonable or not? I mean, I don't know that we have that, and I don't know that we can have that without an enormous investment in sort of well, more than an auditor's unit. I mean, audit's fine, they can count numbers, they've got to count it against something.
Well,
We don't have anything counted against.
Right, and you know, the costs of approved privates are different based on the needs. So comparing a Ben Haven to like a Ben Bronze,
No, yeah,
that's
way
right.
different. Way different.
Right, so there has to be, you know, some understanding of the nature of the population and general needs of the population, which then gets translated.
Well, you could look at each individual school based upon itself. I mean, that's the only true way to really even talk about changes in tuition or costs. If you look at the trends of the school itself against itself, and if there was a huge increase, then investigate further. I mean, at the very basis, that's where you could start, but I don't know.
I don't pretend to know. I just know that as a superintendent, we had to project what our increases are in the district, and we have to live with those. I might have needed 12 to 15% per year to really do what I wanted to do, but I got 3. Do you know what I mean? And we had to live within that. And I understand that it's different for private, it's different for the rest, but how can we help the school districts if we're saying we can't put any guardrails on it at all? Then it just means we're going to continue as we're going to continue, and districts are screaming about this and have been. I think we have to pay some attention to it and think about it differently. That's all I'm saying.
Well, I don't disagree with any of that. I'm just concerned, you know, we could obviously do cost control, right? You can't go more than 5% save services. And what that's gonna mean is that some apps and some risks are gonna say, well, we can't take your kid. And we already have a problem with too few possible placements in a lot of cases. So I'm not sure, sort of a
Can't
cost
we-
control mechanism.
But you can have a cost threshold where it's triggered.
Yeah, you could.
You could say 5%, you could say 10%. I mean, we have that on, when I'm on the Board of Ed and budget, like, I don't want to see every line item. I want to see the big ones.
Yeah.
Because that, for me, is a bigger thing.
Yeah.
And of course, we're not even saying this, a kid can move districts in between the summers. It could be in the middle of the year, and then budget going, no matter what kind of estimates you get from all these school systems. So for me, I think the estimate is a good thing. In the end, if we overestimate how much money we need, it's still the town's money. We just don't get it like that. A lot of people don't understand that, right? Often in Connecticut, it's always the town's money until you request it and get it. So no harm, no foul as far as I'm concerned. But it's a multi-pronged approach, right? We have to get more highly qualified people in the schools to help so that we have fewer outplacements. And then when we do have outplacements, a threat of an audit, what that looks like, I don't know, is going to, I think, just by itself help control costs. It will also be something when negotiating with your own unions that you can bring up and say, like, we're gonna have to justify this to the state because we're gonna have to audit if we have this. So that I think, listen, it's all shots in the dark, but there has to be a cost control. And I don't think you can say 5% and you don't get nothing else. I think there needs to be a trigger for either a partial or a full audit amongst the, what is it, triennial or something like that, that they guys already kind of deal with. So.
Well, our tri-chair has a comment.
Oh,
Attorney Lobbin.
Hi, thanks. And my apologies for not being able to be there in person today. You know, I'm listening to this discussion and looking at the way that the recommendation is worded. And, you know, one of the issues that I'm asking or thinking about revisiting is this concept of the rate approval system, because we did write here, other states have rate approval systems, but the task force believes that the cost of such a system is likely to exceed any savings. I don't know that we have any data to support that statement. And we haven't examined any data to support that statement. So, you know, when we're saying we want audits, you know, in part what we're saying is we think that there needs to be some accountability. In part, we're saying we think there needs to be some public disclosure of the information that's going into the rate setting. I may be wrong, and I'm open to discussion of this, but I think that when we ask the state auditor to audit, what the standards that they're going to be applying are the generally accepted principles of accounting. I don't know that they're going to be examining the reasonableness of the rates set by these organizations. And so, you know, I guess I'm thinking about whether, do we need to re-examine? I don't think we have time to do it now before we issue a final report to look at the relative costs of a rate setting system. But if we're really concerned about rate setting, then it seems to me that that may be the jurisdiction of a rate setting board, not necessarily the state auditor.
I hate to propose that we propose another task force, but I mean, but that looking at whether rate setting is an appropriate outcome is something that would take a lot of work by another group.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I don't think that we can say really that we can say we think that there may be you know, costs of such a system that would likely exceed the savings, and therefore we can't recommend it in this forum, but we believe that
merits
somebody ought to
future.
look at that in the future.
It merits the investigation.
I also like the idea of a trigger. You know, if something is above this amount, I like the idea of triggering a response to that, an individual response. I just, am concerned, and, you know, Brian's not on today, but, is there the capacity at the State Department of Education to respond to those triggers?
I can respond for Brian, go.
Probably.
Yeah, but see,
I'll just-
but for me, that's not our agenda.
Right.
Our agenda is make recommendations that we think might help, and they can determine whether they
Well-
can go. And then with potentially saying it could be another working group, then they can just determine that we're gonna have to do this a different way.
Well, Jason, let me just, the first question on the trigger. Okay, you have a trigger, same services, if it goes up more than 5% in a year, it triggers something. Who's doing that? And I guess we're all in agreement that it's the state, not the district, is that right? And, I mean, we don't have to be, I mean, it could be the district. And then what is it that's gonna happen at that point? And that's a question of, you know, what's useful and what capacity there is and how much it's gonna cost to do it. So, I mean, I would like to work through those questions, make that sort of recommendation. You know, and of course, as we know with, you know, minimum budget and things like that, the same services doesn't, you know, ends up having 1,000 exceptions to it. What is a different service, and, you know, and how do you avoid that issue? And indeed, if it is the same IEP from year to year, you got another problem, which is, you know, it's looking like don't have an appropriate program.
It's not working.
Yeah.
It is working, then why is the cost going up so much?
Yeah.
And then there might be an answer to that, like a viable answer to that. For me, I totally understand what you're saying. We don't want to send the legislature on a wild goose chase, but I do feel like the task force cost control was one of the main reasons I joined for my union. Like, I see it from my Board of Ed side, I see it from my side as a school counselor, my related service friends, and I see it from the side of just being a citizen and paying my taxes. I feel like we're running around in circles, and I do feel like if we need to further like pull this out, at least to separate the two entities, that's totally fine. But I do feel like we have resources to state. Why do we have a Department of Education if they're not going to do things like this, in my mind, right? We're spending all our time testing and whatnot. This would be far greater use, and we would have then more money, hopefully, to do other things for special education students.
I was just wondering, and Lisa, you may know the answer to this because I've heard this several times about Connecticut and the number of kids that we have proportionate to that are proportionally placed in out-of-district placements that were relatively high compared to other states.
Number one.
Right. If we're number one, doesn't that also, and not that I want to sit on an additional task force, but I'm saying that isn't that give us the basis to really, even from the state level, that's something that we want to change, right? Like there has to be there's some basis outside of just the cost. There's a problem, right? There's a problem if we have so many kids that we're placing in other settings. What is that about? And what is it that we can learn from it? So I think it's a deeper issue than just the money, because I personally believe for some kids it's an exclusionary practice, particularly children of color. But I think that we have to think about why is it that we're continuing to be number one in a number of students that we're continuing to place out? And really, what's the long-term impact for some students, right? For those folks who worked in those settings, again, I understand personally what the trajectory is for some kids. And really, quite honestly, I think it's not just a money conversation, it's about what's right for kids conversation.
You know,
So I
Tiffany,
think we have to do something.
and that's why I would much rather spend the money on building capacity in districts than spending the money
Right.
building a huge audit unit to investigate.
No, I understand that, but I think we have to do both and, because even as a state of Connecticut, I mean, that's not a good look for us, right?
That's
It's
what we
not
want to be number
good,
one. Nope.
right? I don't think it's good. We have to take a look at that, right? Why does everyone think the destination needs to be one of these out-of-district placements, right? We get it all the time. Oh yeah, put the kid here. Have you been? Like sometimes I'm like, have you been to these places? Folks, why are you continuing to make these recommendations? What makes you think this is the better long-term best practice for students? So I also think that there is not just a money conversation where we need to look into it. It's about really looking at long-term, what's the impact on kids and really what we need to do for kids. So I think there's a larger conversation to be had. And maybe our recommendation is that we are going to be creating a task force that's going to look into this. Sorry. Right.
I do want to ask Leslie about this. What leads to a decision to outplace a kid in Hartford?
It depends if the student is a Hartford Public Schools only student, right? That is not in open choice or a non-Hartford magnet school. And if we can't program for the child internally based on our programs that we have in district. And quite frankly, if it's, you know, as you know, if it's in a magnet school that is not operated by us, I can only make the assumption that it is the same reason why we do it. Right, that they don't have a program for the student. And I have even less to no visibility into that if it's an open choice student.
But what would you need in order to create the programs in district to avoid these outplacements?
Tier one for me, base foundation is I just need a full complement of my special education staff. Let me just start there.
Yeah.
I want to create more in-district programs. I've had internal and external folks develop strategies and plans and programs. I have them on the shelf because I cannot implement because I don't have the staff. And right, that's connected to you know, the pay scale that we can or cannot offer. It's connected to all of these external things that don't even get to what the, you know, the initial question that was posed about what's best for the student. So there are all of these foundational conditions that have to exist for the adults to be able to deliver a program for students before I can even get to, right, is this the best placement for a child? And that what that comes, okay, so then we have the staffing, then we have to build capacity in the staffing in general ed and special education. I mean, I think all of us in this meeting can relate to. And it feels so elusive. And I can only speak, right, about Hartford Public Schools and the needs that we have. In an urban, high concentrated.
I found that incredibly helpful, what you just said.
Like I can't even get from, I can't even get to a tier two if right, tier two in the sense of organizational conditions that are needed. I need my base. I just need the base to begin to think about implementation.
Amy, is your answer the same as to why you outplace kids?
The same in some senses, but then it's different. And, you know, the smaller the district, the less opportunity you have to develop individualized programs, right? When you have children that are really individualized with significant needs, they don't have a peer group that you can educate them with. So when you're looking at the least restrictive environment, sometimes there's a peer group that they need to be with, right? For example, your deaf and hard of hearing population, right? I don't have a peer group. So what is the least restrictive environment? There are multiple facets to that. Staffing is huge. Peer group is huge. If you have, for example, for a smaller district, because I used to work in you know, the northwest corner, when you have 500 students, or let me even go smaller than that, 200 students in your whole district, is it financially feasible or responsible to create a full program for one child? Is it appropriate for that child, right? So there's a lot of different things that you need to think about. The larger the district, the easier it is to do those things because you have a larger group to provide peers for. So those are some things that you need to consider as well.
Okay, Catherine, then Stephanie.
Yeah, I think again, we've talked about this a lot, and from a parent perspective, it's almost always, no, I shouldn't say that. It's very often the case that parents want their kids educated closer to home. Again, I want to caution the tone of the conversation, which gets to be like, Why do we do this more than anybody else? We've talked about the numbers. We've talked about the way that we count out of district placements in Connecticut, which includes RESCs. In a lot of states, it doesn't include the RESCs, for example. We've also talked about the way that we have these very tiny districts that a lot of other states, might partition their districts differently or have, more regionalization. So I always want to caution the thoughtfulness of this. I think if we're going to do some sort of analysis, we're going to have to look at districts that do not have self-contained settings or spectrum of self-contained settings at all, across the age groups, across the need levels, and including, as we see, an increasingly higher number of students that have, externalizing emotional needs. And so, like, it is ideal if we have that available. And I think we've talked a lot about how to fund the seed money. And I know that's, that's something that's really important to the whole group for many factors. And I also would say, I really appreciate, Leslie and Amy's perspective. And I think it's really thoughtful to think about the peer group, to think about, interaction with peers. I know that sometimes it probably feels out of your hands from Hartford Public Schools, but if the magnet school is the school that knows the student best, ostensibly making an assumption there, that they should be making recommendations for students. And that doesn't happen in all districts. Some districts still try to maintain control of decision-making, even when the student is in a magnet school, as to what the recommendation that the student needs. So I again want to say, like, it's ideal that we have a spectrum of service available in district. And I think, again, what Leslie is saying is that we can't even think that far if we can't even get the people to do the basic, the basic level of special education servicing, much less a self-contained, thoughtful program.
Stephanie.
Thank you. So to piggyback on Leslie and what Amy were saying, as somebody who does work at a RESC, people, when we look at intensity of the services, that's why those kids are coming to me as a RESC, because they need extra help. That might not be what you can do in a regular ed classroom or in a specialized classroom in a regular school. So they're coming to myself, they're coming to ASAPs for these reasons, because we need to recognize that there's a caseload and workload guidelines that we might have less. Like, we reduce or cap that for our students, because once you do more for less a group of kids, you're going to get more out of it. At least that's what I see as a teacher in a RESC and then as a special ed teacher. So those intense behaviors are the ones that come to us. They're not the kids. And we talked about caseload way back when we started this course. And I think we've moved away. I mean, that's something you need, is to look at caseload and workload guidelines, because that's what works best. Small staff to student ratios. You can't do that normally in a regular school system. That's why they come to, say, a RESC or to an ASAP. So I think we need to not forget that part of it. I also want to remind you, today is National Special Education Day for IDEA. So since this was what we're talking about, I just want to put that in. Boom, boom, boom. Thank you.
Well, we have a recommendation number 3, or funding for the creation of the district program. It's a fairly modest recommendation. I mean, you want to be more extravagant with that? First. Second, do we want to, Catherine is quite right in saying that the national numbers on our district placements are skewed in a lot of ways. And of course, one big way is that we've got, 202 LEAs in Connecticut now. And Maryland has 8, right? I mean, so of course I have more in district, because these programs exist in district rather than as separate units in the state with larger districts. So those numbers are not terribly useful, really.
I think it's still worth us taking a look at that. Even if we skew, I just think at some point in time, I think there has to be a part of the conversation and really what happens. And Andy, just before you go further, and I think it was Stephanie maybe who was saying this, or even Leslie was talking about just kind of the base and what we have in tier. One of the things that we're finding that's terribly difficult is not just the increase in the children with the externalizing behaviors, but the fact that the bare foundation of what you have in schools are no longer there. So when we're struggling in general ed and special ed alike, really the opportunities to do things and programming for students who require more becomes that much more challenging, not even just on a general, not a special education end, but even in just a general education setting, just in general, the base foundation is not there in the same way, so. I'll stop by saying that.
Tell me what the base foundation
I'm
is.
saying that we have teacher shortages
Yeah.
across the board, not just in special education. So I'll give you, just to illuminate my point in this regard, just a little bit further, is that we have a growing number of students maybe who have autism spectrum disorders who could be in a mainstream setting with some additional support. But if you have in some of the classrooms substitute teachers or newer teachers or no access to paraprofessionals, that challenge whereby maybe 5 years ago, you were able to service the same student, it becomes that much more of a challenge. And the challenge now becomes in the special education realm. And that may be a child who ends up in an out-of-district placement because of the fact that their foundation is not there. So I just think that schools in general, where we used to be able to do some things, not accounting for any, increase in externalizing behaviors, we are starting to see that the house doesn't necessarily have all its pieces enough to be able to wrap our hands around students, so.
And I think that's also exacerbated Tiffany's point on the complexity of the students.
Yeah.
Whereas 5 years ago, you had a kid that maybe just had an autism spectrum
Yeah.
disorder, and now you're piling mental health diagnoses
Yeah.
on top of that. And all, the acuity of students is
Mhm.
higher,
It is.
both in district and in out of district placements. Which is also
That's
contributing to some of the rise in costs due to the necessary services to serve those students. But I think, to Tiffany's point and to other points, if we are gonna recommend some sort of other group that's gonna look at some of these things, actually defining what is an out-of-district placement and what's not, if we're gonna tackle that somehow,
Yeah.
it's worth talking through.
Yeah.
Why are we number one? Are there, because
Regardless of scheme.
if New Haven if somebody sends Tiffany a student from another district to an in-district program, they're still considered out of district for that,
That's right.
even though they're being educated in district, just in another district. And so I do think there is some value in thinking through that from a prevalency perspective, not for the sake by January 1st, but.
There's so many aspects to this whole piece that I just want to sort of break it down and go back to first, because Tiffany, I agree with you 100%. And I agree with much of what is being said. I just want to go back to the cost factor. Could we talk about a trigger? If in fact the services remain the same, could there be a percentage increase that triggers an investigation by SDE? If SDE wants to set up a board for that, then that's SDE's choice. But I think if we could just take a stab at that, and the other pieces are so profound, then actually they're much more important to me than the cost factor. But I'd like to get the cost factor out of the way because it's constantly on people's minds. So if there could be a trigger, I would be, if the services change, that's a different thing. But if there is no change in services and the increase is, I don't even know, to more than 10%.
Your CPI,
Yeah,
if it's going up more than inflation rate,
yeah.
why
Then-
why is that
then-
bigger?
Then can we ask that be investigated?
Well,
It's just one step further than where we are right now. We don't have anything.
I think the investigation by the SD is a better vehicle than an auditor. Because I don't remember who said something, the auditor is not gonna look at what we're trying to get at here. But if there's a way to write in the recommendation of an estimate, an early estimate.
An
and I
early
do think we need
estimate.
to-
Oh, we got the early estimate is one piece of
One
this.
piece,
We have the threshold leading to an investigation by DPE, but we're not going to specify what that investigation looks like.
right, but I do think we have to separate the risks and the
that's one
privates
piece of
as
this.
well. It has to be separated.
But I don't think we should separate them in terms of a trigger. If there is an increase, whether it's a risk or a,
I just feel like, I really feel like in the draft, if you read this without knowing what anything was, you could easily get confused
And make assumptions.
and make
Yeah.
assumptions that are not correct.
Yeah,
So-
but
Because
if
this is. going
the
much
price is going up,
together.
if price is going up a lot.
It is.
Whether
No,
it's,
I
whether it's
agree.
an
I
outside
agree.
force or risk, what's the difference in terms of what SDA would look
Well, it
at?
could alert at least legislatures to the differences we're talking about, right? Like,
Right.
we're measuring apples to oranges with other states. This might be one way of them saying, oh, why are we even counting them as outplacement if they're in a public school system?
Right.
I don't know, but, I don't have a problem with separating them out within the same paragraph or 3A,
Well,
3B.
we can make clear that they're different,
I mean,
they're
yeah,
different units, but I, you know,
But there would still be.
I think the triggers
the same thing. And the early reporting, the early estimates would also
I think
apply to both.
Absolutely.
I would be, I think I would have served my superintendents well with that.
Can we go back to 3 then and see whether we wanted to make the encouragement, the incentive for in-district programs more robust than what we have here?
$20 million will be utilized very quickly.
I was just gonna say that numbers.
Yeah, I don't know how we came to that number. I think we just as a group
Yeah, we
threw it
do.
out there, but when you think about $20 million across the entire state.
Like her 50?
I would go 60.
Okay.
I'd go 60. I just think it's so important. And you know what? I'm also gonna say it's an equity thing. I was married for, it is. an equity.
Definition, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was married for many years to a principal in Branford. He was an elementary principal. He never sent a kid out. All right. In 20 years, he was a principal. He always could he could always make accommodations for whatever kid it was within his school because he had 16 or 18 kids in a classroom and he had a preponderance of special ed teachers and paras. I would come home from Bridgeport and I had 28 kids in a class and no paras. It's an equity issue, guys. You can't make those accommodations. As Tiffany said, if you don't have the staff, and Leslie said, if you don't have the staff and you don't have the conditions in your regular ed, in your tier 1 instruction, and it continues on every level to continue to be an equity issue.
Michelle, I apologize, Michelle, but it's very hard to see your kid in the
Yeah.
background there.
Sorry. The reason I think that we discussed $20 million in this recommendation is because we said that this was supposed to be a pilot program. And I think that maybe was left out of the discussion in the write-up. So it was, and I'm not opposed to increasing that number or describing it in a different way if we think that this is one of our more important recommendations that needs to be addressed in a different way. I did, and without confusing the discussion in any way, just being sensitive to the timing here. One of the things that I thought that we might also look at is lowering the threshold for being eligible for excess cost reimbursement, because we did look at that as, let's remove the within available appropriations language from the excess cost reimbursement, but we left it at 4.5 times per pupil expenditure, which, in district calculations at this point is well in excess of $80,000 in most districts, which is a pretty high threshold. So just looking at the different financial recommendations and, fiscal commitments that we're looking to secure from the state at this point, I'm also wondering whether we want to reduce that to, for example, 3 times per pupil expenditure rather than 4.5.
Well, there was a proposal that we reduce it to 3 times for in-district programming and keep it at 4.5 for outplacements.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I like it. I love it.
I mean, it seems like a reasonable place to start to me, and it preserves an incentive to keep kids in district, potentially.
Other views on that issue?
I mean, it's annually discussed up at the General Assembly for a brief period of time, right? I think that the normal response is that there's not enough data to calculate the financial impact of making such a change, but.
And the legislature asked SDE to provide that data.
Yeah.
And Brian said they collected it, but I've asked them for it, and we've never seen it.
So I mean, I think it's a good recommendation, but that would be the response.
Well, if you look down this sheet that, Fran gave us, and you assume that 4.5 times for this district is probably $100,000, which is, sort of the average. You'll see that about half of these out-of-district placements, would not qualify for excess costs on half would, right? But we have no idea whatever on in-district program, as to, how many programs, would total over three times, per pupil.
Well, I think we would include more in district at 3 times than we would at 4.5 times. So I think it's a good place to start.
And we can't do any budget estimate on that because we just don't have the data to do that.
But keep it at 4.5 for outplacement when it's the appropriate placement per student, I think is high. We're making recommendations that the 20 million is like nothing. I would prefer to say lower the threshold, and that helps everybody. And then there's not competitive grant where like someone who has a grant writer has their chance. I know that we were saying restrictions and stuff. I just feel like the legislature will look and see what the lowest hanging fruit is, and they're going to grab it. And, Helen McCarthy had a personal relationship, so I could know. But I just want big things, few of them, do it. And what the CCM is saying the same thing as CCM, right? Then there's double the pressure from your constituents. I worry that with grant writing and whatnot, it's just going to disappear. Versus if they're able to save money off the top, and districts can then, and certainly incentivized by having a certain rate for in-district versus out-district, but that will incentivize people to create programs, not a grant writing program. If we're looking for where money is spent, we also have to remember, and I agree with all these recommendations, by the way, like just going in, like with a little bit of changes, like this is why we're doing them. But I think they're substantial. If we actually create a caseload number, first of all, I don't know how many districts will push back on that because it's the staffing issue. But that is a serious recommendation. And we've already talked about like one kid could be equal to 20 kids, depending on what the ratio is. That's a huge substantial cost to districts if we're going to say you shouldn't have more than 10 kids under caseload. So there's money all over this place. I prefer to avoid a grant and incentivize the other areas more and then allow the districts to be more creative because everyone's going to benefit from those.
Stephanie, we can't read what's in the text message, what's in the message here. Can you tell us what you want to say?
Yes, did you send the estimates to the people online? I think, did you hand out that Fran did? Because I have no idea what any of that is. If
No,
I'm sure.
I will, I will. I had a doctor, I had to take the names off and all that, so I did not.
Can I take a picture and send it to the thing? Is that okay?
Yeah.
I mean,
Want me to?
as most I guess it is. I'm just gonna do the first page. It looks like someone.
Yeah. But make sure it doesn't have the name of the district.
I'm thinking-
We'll email it to you.
First, no disagree about it.
You can email it to the whole task force.
Yeah. Well,
So we're saying, can we agree on the trigger? Can we agree on the 3%? 3 times, so.
well, 3 for a district,
For a district,
but not for out of district,
right. We
which
agree
does
with
create
that?
some bit of incentive to do things in district.
You want to leave it at 20 million and 3 times?
And are we gonna say that that's a pilot program and include the pilot program in number 3?
We'll call it a pilot,
Okay, so we're gonna leave it at 20 million?
but we're going to put pilot and we're
Alright.
going to say 3 times.
Mhm.
And that's not a pilot.
No.
That's not a pilot, so do excess cost.
Yeah.
And be very explicit that we're doing this to encourage the development of in-district programs. Can
I just want to say that that's a major move forward from where we are right now.
Can I want to deal with the teacher shortage issue. What can we do?
Well, CAPS has the number one goal of elevating the profession and increasing teacher salary. That's our number one goal for this year. And, you know, I think if we all press together on that, you know, I had a hard time first with raising the salary because I also believe working conditions are really important. However, if there is a foundational trust for the respect for the profession, then the salary needs to increase. And that would be a real signal that we are respecting the profession in Connecticut. And some of the starting salaries are just outrageously low.
Leslie, what are the two things we can recommend that would deal with your staff shortage problems?
I gotta pay. I mean, Fran captured it. I mean, we're in the process of finalizing our contract, and even with that, I can't even go above the surrounding towns. I can barely get equal. So that requires investments that we locally don't have.
And I've been around a long time. I remember the Enhancement Act in the late 80s, all right? And I remember the fact that we were in shortages just like this, guys. And we did an Enhancement Act and the shortages left. And the state was responsible for that Enhancement Act. And they need to be responsible now because the municipalities cannot pay for it. So
It's gotta be an infusion.
Yes, it's gotta be state based, and I'll tell you, the profession changed after that Enhancement Act, and we need that now. And you know, we've been talking about it for so long, and there's no action.
Well,
You just have to remember that it's not just starting salaries because it will impact the
Yes.
entire salary schedule.
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
we have this recommendation on ECS. Does that cover it, or do we have to do something more specifically on staff pay?
If I can jump in for a second, I went back and looked at the Ed Research for Action overview brief that was distributed to the task force at some point during this process. I don't remember who or when. This is from September of 2024. And I was looking for, you know, there's a lot of things in here about improving teacher training that I don't think that the legislature can really do anything about. So I was looking for those recommendations that could be the subject of a legislative recommendation. And I have to agree with Fran. I think the only one that I found that, you know, is likely, it's included in the list of evidence-based practices, is financial incentives for teachers in surplus areas to move into special education roles to reduce the special education teacher shortage by leveraging the existing workforce. And one of the points that they raise here is researchers found that in Hawaii, $10,000 bonuses for special education teachers reduced vacancies and reliance on uncertified teachers by inducing general educators in surplus areas to switch to special education teaching positions. And I think that has to be, you know, a state-funded action. I don't think that we can just say, well, districts should just, you know, create $10,000 signing bonuses.
I will just
There are
say that
several states, I'm sorry, there are several states, Michelle, that are doing that. Besides, you know, there are smaller counties in Texas that have seen improvements in their ability to staff in special education based on some of those models that you just referenced.
I said, Fred, you might have been included in this conversation. 3 years ago, when they accelerated our program to get into special education, as a school counselor, I wasn't qualified. So my certification, because I was not a teacher, would not allow me to do it. Now, I work with special education students one-on-one and in a fashion very similar to case manager, but that has been restricted because I don't have the teaching certificate. That might be best practice, but I do want to bring that up. Also, I did see someone drop initially something about a comment given up by Governor Lamont recently. And I'm also fearful that we're having a lot of conversations here, and he's being really stringent with his language about budget. He's asking for borrowing right now, even with whatever we have in the rainy day fund. So I don't know who's put it in there. Maybe you're thinking of the same quote as me, but it makes me very nervous if he's not kept in the loop about this, because he might just veto the darn things.
Yeah, that was me.
Okay.
And I will say, he came to the Special Education Summit, which I think was a nice gesture. I don't think he said much that indicated he knows a lot about the topic area. But he did say, sorry, is this record? Yes, this is record. What I don't think it was. I think he did talk a lot about workforce development, so that's clearly where his mind is at with all this. But I think we really need to keep the pressure on, specifically around special education, and make sure that that message is along with the general education budgeting, but that we have a carve out. So
You know, Catherine, there was one more thing I wanted to just say on that. I do think increasing the salaries is important. Specific to special ed, CREC has a wonderful alternative program to have regular ed teachers or counselors, whoever it is.
No
Trust me, it's
counselors,
not
related
counselors.
service plan.
Yeah.
Well,
Teachers.
well, maybe they ought to look at
They
that.
should.
No,
And they can become certified as special ed teachers. I think that should be paid for by the school district. I really do think that and state incentives could be there. If we pay for teachers to become certified as special ed teachers, I mean, it really worked for me in Bridgeport. I got 5 or 6 in 1 year.
Yeah, we do too, about 5 or 6 every year we're getting from,
Yep.
our cross endorsements.
Yep.
I think we need to look at the caseload and the workload more specifically, because you're not gonna get teachers to leave a regular ed classroom, even though those class sizes are increasing everywhere, to go to a caseload that is unmanageable and untenable. I mean, that is one of the reasons why teachers won't go into special education, is because the caseload and the workload is way too high.
Not to mention,
But
many of the
some
classes
people-
are almost fully special ed already.
Right. But it's also the paperwork that's required and the legal.
And I think we
nature of
did,
that,
we did
which
make
is
some
awesome.
recommendations as to
Very-
take that
very
paperwork
general.
out. I think it's not specific enough. That's number
It's almost on
3.
the last page.
Conservative recommendation. I think we could be a little more, do a little more on that one.
I just wanted to go back to this incentive for teachers, and there's something for us to consider. I think it came up here before, that if we are making an increase, although I do advocate for special education, I think we would have to do something. I think, Fran, you talked about across the board, because one of the things that we find in district is if you incentivize one group and not the other, people are struggling across the board, and it absolutely impacts morale. We have people on different steps who still can't get over some of those things. So I just think that if we are gonna look at it, we are gonna have to do something across the board for every teacher.
I do agree with you, Tiffany.
But regardless, if it is done, it's gotta be done at the state level, because otherwise it's gonna be a nightmare.
Oh, yeah, no,
Just
that's
from a union
true.
perspective, you
Very-
can't even talk about it.
Yeah, we're
That's
very
true.
clear that it is state
No,
level.
you're right.
Yeah.
That's, yeah.
And, there's money up there now, and,
But the question
Depends what you
is,
ask.
my question again is, by proposing this massive increase in ECS, is that how we're covering this, or?
No.
No.
No,
Yeah, that's separate though.
It is separate.
Absolutely separate.
And so what is the recommendation? I mean, Michelle talked about a bonus for special ed teachers, which I'm not hearing a lot of support for. But I'm certainly in favor of that.
I'm not. I think you have to talk about all teachers,
Right now, we have shortage areas in more than just special education.
because you
I
don't
mean,
get
if that's the
one
case-
intervention with.
If that's the case, I would be given a signing bonus to a speech and language pathologist even before a special ed teacher whose situation is even more dire. So you have to be careful about that, because we have a host of different folks. And if we are, it has to be more of an the list doesn't have to be exhausted, but we would have to be very
If you
thoughtful.
look at the list of,
Yeah,
I mean.
shortage areas.
Yeah.
You have to
shortage
do
areas.
math teachers.
You always do
Physics.
math and
Science.
physics, yeah.
Well, I
Or
mean,
language.
Yeah, foreign
We
language.
certainly could recommend some sort of program of bonuses for shortage areas.
By the way, guys, if you look at the research on any incentives that are given,
Mhm.
it never pans out.
Mhm.
They don't remain, they don't stay, they don't, any of that. I mean, because we played with it for new teachers coming in, whatever. Just look at the research. It doesn't work.
But you raise the starting salary.
Stephanie,
Raise the
It's
starting
the ones
salary.
that we're to homegrown programs seem like we can retain people.
Well, in our contract is written in that when you can get paid for by district, you have to pay it off over time or you pay it all back. So I think that's, and I was supportive of that. The district puts money into you, you need to pay it back over time.
Well, for the certification,
Yeah.
for a special ed teacher, I asked them to agree to 3 years of
Yeah, exactly.
service. And if they didn't, they had to pay back the
Correct.
tuition that I paid, but,
Incentive for them to
well,
stay.
Stephanie's been waiting to talk.
I'm
Stephanie's
sorry.
talking.
Stephanie.
I think a piece of it is trying to get people into the profession. Again, tuition reimbursement fully, at least for a whole course, and that could be 3 times a year. We do that at where I work. That's helped me get through it as DSAP, and then going into the profession. That's a big one. I'm going to go back to what you were talking about with giving incentives to special ed. I'm a special ed teacher. I get it. I love this job. To get somebody else who doesn't have that thought just for the money is not why you want people, one, to go into a profession. And also, I'm losing my thing. If you take in any district, it could be affluent to a needs district, somebody who will have a bunch of students with disabilities in their classroom, and you're going to say, okay, just because you're with this group of kids, you're doing a different job when you're trying to juggle an entire classroom, and then you have half your class because that year you got them, and they're all have some kind of special needs at some point. That's not going to go over well, and it's not going to get buy-in for somebody going from one place to another. So I really have a problem with trying to put that incentive program.
But if you do the caseloads and you're
Caseload
specific
and
about
workload,
it,
yes.
then that teacher can then help co-teach classes more easily. Have a
Yes, the
more
workload.
manageable workload.
Yeah, that's what we have to do. It's just that we've never, it's in our contracts, and you want to go to that. I think people are recognizing that need is a greater need now, and we can't get teachers. So yes, they are sticking to the caseloads, say in a contract like a RESC has, because they can't find a teacher. So you're not going over those caseloads like we used to. It's just not happening because you can't have kids in a room when you don't have a teacher. And Bridgeport is a huge one.
I want to try to drill down to specific recommendations.
We do
What's
have
our specific recommendation on teacher, on A first? What's our specific recommendation on caseloads?
Well, we do have one on caseloads and workloads already.
Well, I just heard it was 2 week.
Well, it doesn't give specifics. It basically allows the legislature to determine it. We can make a harder recommendation and say a certain number, but
But I think we wanted to avoid the number specific.
Yeah, we're gonna have to.
And let somebody else, in this recommendation, we tasked the State Department of Ed with researching what it should be, right?
So I just have to say that we've put out staffing guidelines before, just based on what we know is good practice, but what I'm concerned about is we're saying that we can't find teachers, and then we're trying to enact caseloads. Who's servicing the children?
Well, if we raise,
That's
if
what
we're
I'm saying,
talking
right?
about the incentive of raising teacher pay to
Right.
60,000,
But
Yeah.
whatever it
This
is.
would have to be
And
something
this-
after
yeah.
we have a adequate teaching staff in order to get to that place. I just worry that we're putting this recommendation out there when we know there's still a struggle
Well,
to.
the recommendation just says to research the feasibility of it. It doesn't actually say to do anything.
Yeah, no, I think I'm good with that. I'm saying, I'm responding.
Specific becomes
No.
problematic.
Yeah.
No, I'm responding to the fact that if we're putting in numbers. Yeah. Because we can't do that.
So I'm not. The starting teacher salary at 60. Okay, that's fine, but how about all the related service people? How about all the para educators? How about the bus drivers?
Everybody.
Everybody what?
Everyone gets the starting. salary.
Educators. we
Educators,
call it
in general,
so
related
you'd be
service staff.
mandating that every district move their lowest salary up to 60. And that would
Doesn't
move.
East Hartford have that already?
I mean, a lot of us.
Well, what, but doesn't cover paraeducators, and that's even
No,
a bigger
there should be-
shortage.
Well, you have a recommendation in here for paras
We do
starting
have a- we
at
do.
25,000, right?
$25.
But I didn't think we actually agreed on a
$25.
number.
I thought,
And I did get some feedback from one member of the task force, Mike Grove, who can't be here today, that said, it says medical benefits, we can't afford that at the
Exactly.
at the district level.
So open up the state plan to that. I mean, there's creative solutions you can do.
Well, that's what we said. Sean Scanlon's office came through with 5 million each year. We need more money for medical benefits for paras.
Well, I want to come down to a recommendation I can write down here, and I'm not, are we okay with the caseload language now, or do we want to change that?
I'm okay with what it looks like now.
Me too.
Looking at the-
Okay, so we'll stick with that. Now, what do we want to say about base pay and who's paying it?
I think it's dangerous to put base pay in there.
For-
I mean, I think that just the compression issues will be very, very costly.
We didn't mention a number
I just
in
threw
our,
it over.
yeah, you threw it out, but we didn't, we had that in mind, but we did not mention a number, but we did say, increase, teacher salaries.
And I think we said that the difference would be paid by the state.
Yeah. Similar to the Enhancement Act, where they paid, to be honest with you, they only paid for 3 years, and then they ran out of
And
money.
then it phases in,
Hmm?
right? Then it phases in.
Yeah,
But telling Leslie she's got to pay her lowest paid teacher 60,000, it's just going to result in fewer teachers.
no, the state would pay the money, give her the money to pay 60,000.
Right, but then you're creating a pattern that the districts are gonna, it's just gonna be the cliff like we're dealing with right now with all of the ARP ESSER money that we ran out of, right? You're creating a hole for districts that we can't manage.
But
Eating-
Amy, we're asking that it be done over time, that it's not a one-time thing, that it
But the
be done.
Enhancement Act was, for us to trust the legislature to make a long-term commitment based on past practice, we can't be that trusting.
Well, we can't be that trusting, but where do we begin then? If you don't have respect for, if we don't have the salaries and we know that that's an issue, do we just not touch it? Or do we forge ahead and say the state needs to be responsible for it? And hope and pray that we get 3 years or 4 years out of that. How else do we do it? We can't put it on municipalities, and we don't have teachers. And, it's really serious, guys. It's not just Connecticut, it's national, but it is becoming incredibly serious. And
I think we're allowed to be bold in what we're asking for. I mean,
why
that's,
not?
we're saying that's a priority of all the things we're asking for. We're saying that's a priority. I mean, I think that's the point.
But it does, I mean, it has two ancillary effects. One is it creates basically a state pay rate for teachers, which doesn't exist now, it's all by district. And two, what does that do to union contracts?
Well, they would have to.
We'll have to reopen them.
That's what the Enhancement Act.
But if you do it over 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
When it comes up, then it's,
Will
Negotiated, right?
increasing the salary actually results in more people wanting to enter the profession? Like, if we have a limited pool, I think a minimum teacher salary is important for like Leslie's, what she's experiencing, where she pays lower typically than surrounding districts. So she's unable to recruit and retain teachers. If there's a minimum salary though, will that allow those more, financially extravagant communities to raise their rate even higher?
Put in the
And
same-
even
Yeah,
though Hartford might get to 60,000, they're now paying 75,000, and then it still results in the same issue of shortages in certain districts.
I don't know how the
More people
Enhancement
in the
Act works.
profession.
Oh, I think it was definitely given on an equity basis. So the monies were given out dependent upon the needs of the school district
I think you're right. I think that if the state paid a larger percentage for
for the lower income.
I would just like to say, I'm all for this. I'm an educator, I'm a union leader, like, I'm all for it. But the ancillary effects that Andy was getting to, he hasn't finished that list, right? We're already still trying to pay off what our forebears didn't pay into our retirement previously. And we're still have like the most per capita debt per person. I don't think this will get anywhere. I think, again, and I know I'm beating a dead horse here, is we focus on that ECS funding. We lower the threshold. We lower that. We lower it for the internal stuff. We give as much money as possible to the districts through that mechanism. That is a mechanism that already exists. We don't need to create something. It's not going to break union contracts. And then the savings or the reimbursements that the districts can utilize. I think there are big ideas that need to be discussed. I just don't think it's in the purview of this thing. I mean, like universal PK, like I want it. I don't think it's in our purview. Yeah, everything's connected to education,
But if
including the jobs that Governor Lamont wants to have.
I think we can have a lot of different thoughts on this, but I'm with Catherine. If we're not bold, guys, we're not gonna get the teachers, the special ed teachers that we need. And I don't know how else to do it. I have heard over and over and over again that teachers are not coming in or are leaving because of salary and working conditions. I hear this over and over again. You can give, Jason, all the ECS you want to give, and I'm pushing for ECS all the time as a goal number 2. But the fact of the matter is, and I told Governor Lamont that, you can't legislate the ECS to be used for teacher salary. The ECS is general. And in most cases, when you get more ECS money, the municipalities don't pay as much.
I recognize that, but then if you enforce a class size mandate for special educators, caseload, regular educators, then that is forced, because that's a mandate. And so
Yeah.
you can use it, what I'm saying is that if we are fudging with numbers that we all wanted to do the same thing, I think there's a way to use processes that already exist to mandate it. I just don't know what the legislature would do with any of this.
They did it
All this I
before.
love. I love it.
They did it before in
When?
the Enhancement Act.
I know, but.
They did it, and
Four.
yeah, but it doesn't matter.
Now it's the last.
It was done. I wasn't much older than that, but it was done, guys, and the state.
Was not, and then they didn't fund the retirement.
No, but they funded it over 3 or 4 years, and that wasn't why they didn't fund the retirement.
No, I get it, there's the.
Stephanie has her hand up.
Yeah.
But I think you're making an argument for maybe fiscal guardrails, but no.
Not believe me.
Stephanie.
Yes.
So if we use ECS, it seems to get absorbed into other programs, not necessarily where we want it to go. I think, as Catherine said, we need to make some bold recommendations and then see what they do throw it into the legislators' hands. Now it's going to be on them. We have to make these, we have to do something. So, caseload size, 60,000 starting salary. CEA tried doing that last year. So we also need to keep pushing that, because as somebody who negotiates a contract for my new teachers, that's a conversation we start with. We want to get educators in. So pushing that up helps at least start that talk. Those kids have a lot of debt coming out of college. We need to help that and make sure they have a job when they get out of it.
What's the recommendation here? Right,
Well, we do have several recommendations under services.
we do.
The first, number 1, that talks about, I think, that pool question that Lisa, I think you were raising, and how do we, we can give all the money we want to the teachers, in theory, but if we don't have the pool coming into higher ed, that's not going to solve the problem. So there are some recommendations here that address that, especially those first 2. We talked about that last one, that there's already a board working on that's really important. I think the one about the Parapro was really about how that's a barrier for a lot of folks. So we do have some recommendations that aim at increasing the pool of people coming into special education professions in higher ed?
Well, I keep on hearing about reenacting the Enhancement Act, or some form of it. What are we recommending on that?
I think there's another piece about the Enhancement Act that it's important not to lose sight of for those of us that were born.
I was born out there very young.
It was, here's Gerald Tarazi, then Commissioner of Education, higher standards, higher salaries. And that's how it was sold to the legislature. We're not talking about higher standards here, nor do I think we should be. But it makes it a harder sell when you're just talking about the salary.
Well, I work with Ted Surgery a lot, and he said it was higher standards, higher salary, but Ted wanted, that would have translated into, additional days of training, and he lost that. So when the actual Enhancement Act went through, it went through with their salary and not additional training.
But the pitch,
Was
the
higher.
sales pitch was, it was both. That's the difference.
No, but our sales pitch right now is that we've got a dire shortage that's making the system not work.
Yes.
And, you know, and so we're not talking about mandated training, Patricia, just relax.
Well, we have to get back to that.
I know, yeah, that's your second point, I know.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to see if we can develop a recommendation that we can put in here,
I'm just trying to make
that I
it more,
got, that could, you know.
I'm
like-
trying to make it more powerful because
Yeah.
we know that CAPS is gonna go forward. We know that CEA is gonna go forward. If we all push in the same
Yeah.
direction,
Well, yes.
we might have something.
Commonly.
No, I definitely agree if, increasing teacher salary, but what I was stuck on and trying to figure out a recommendation, and I don't know what the recommendation can be around this notion of work conditions and not just about caseload. I struggle with that. Because that's a real thing. And, you have people who are substituting for others, you got special ed teachers who are doing all kinds of things, and I don't know, I grapple with that every day to make the work conditions better for our folks, and I'm just trying to, I don't know if I have a recommendation, but it's a real thing, and I don't know if any amount of money is going to help that, so I worry about that piece.
Well,
People coming.
and that's my concern. I mean, we could recommend better working conditions, but what does that?
I was gonna
mean?
say, I know, what does that really mean? And that may not mean that.
I've tried it for years with, class size.
Well, and then, in terms of the pay issue.
Yeah.
Yes, higher starting salaries for teachers, which is gonna, go all the way up to avoid compression and all that. Funded by the state, yes. Targeted towards the district with greatest shortages, maybe? Yes, but do we want more specifics than that?
Guys, I have to keep coming back to this idea that this is the Special Education Task Force, and we are trying to address shortages specifically in special education. And while I understand that there's a desire to sort of enhance across the board, I think our mandate is really on getting teachers into the special education profession. I recognize that there wasn't a whole lot of appetite for the idea of the signing bonuses, but it was, according to the document that I'm reviewing, an evidence-based practice, and it was designed to target teachers who are dual certified in general and general and special education, to allow them to choose a special education position if they had a choice. And right now, the choice that they're making, and I know we discussed this on another day, was if they're dual certified, they're choosing general education. So I think we have to recognize that there's a lot of reasons for that, but giving a financial incentive to choose special education if you have dual certification might be one way of addressing it. And to Tiffany's point, there are other shortage areas within special education. So speech language pathologists are also a shortage area. School psychologists are also a shortage area. So I think that we could target our recommendation for financial incentive to those shortage areas that are within the special education and related services sector, and that would be consistent with our mandate as the special education task force.
Michelle, I want to push back a little bit. Regular education teachers are providing the tier 1 supports that we're also discussing here. And if we're looking at ways to reduce the number of students going into special education, if we have more teachers, just in the profession in general, we will, I think, also have more special education teachers. If we're increasing the salary of just being a teacher in general, we will have more of all teachers, which will provide the tier 1 interventions that we've been talking about, as well as increasing the number of special education teachers. So I think it hits more of our points by talking about raising the starting salary of teachers than trying to do a bonus for dual certified teachers.
I also will say, just as my relation with the superintendent, whatever's in the best interest of the kids, they can be moved within their
Yeah,
certification.
yeah, they don't necessarily get the choice. If
Yeah.
you're dual certified and
Can you
they're going to be a
imagine
special education
Removing
teacher,
them, and then they
you
don't
get
a
moved to
bonus.
be a SPED teacher.
Yeah.
But even if we deal with dual certified teachers, that's not gonna deal with the shortage.
No, we need more.
We just need more
We
teachers.
don't need
We
more
need
special
more-
education.
Get more teachers, we will have more special education teachers. We have a low number of people just going into education in general. Never mind just special ed. And if we want to be able to provide appropriate tier 1 interventions, then we need more teachers. And not having substitutes in the classroom, not having teachers teaching 7 out of 8 classes in Waterbury or Hartford, that, and being overwhelmed with the number of students they have. If we have more teachers, we have better tier 1 intervention.
Yeah, I respect that completely, and there's a lot of merit to that. I do think that obviously there's no one solution to this, right? So we're addressing it from a multi-pronged approach, and there's a whole series of recommendations about working conditions. But to the extent that we're looking for recommendations that we can make in addition to the ones that we already have, that is specific to teacher shortage in special education, I would prefer to see something that is targeted to addressing the teacher shortage in special education.
And I just think once we actually do that, I think Lisa started to talk a little bit about that, the inequities. So that's great. We have signing bonuses all across, but then what's that going to mean for coming to Waterbury, Hartford, Bridgeport? That's great because everyone, right? That's not an incentive to bring teachers into the places that have the greatest needs.
Well, I think Andy was gonna say there was a sort of a means testing.
Right.
Or suggesting that could be.
There has to be some caveat to that, because if we're doing that across the board, then it's again, the haves are still gonna have and the have-nots are still.
Yeah,
going
I
to be
started
like,
in Waterbury, I left Waterbury and went to Chappaqua because I made $10,000 more just getting paid on step. Like, that's why I left, was the salary was higher. I would have stayed in Waterbury, but one of us had to make money. My husband's still teaching there. Like that is a big game changer with being able to teach in the inner cities. When the suburb, 20 minutes down the road, you're making 10 grand more.
So it has to be some incentive. I think that some of the recommendations we are making, obviously I do service an urban district, but the reality is that there are some grave disparities between districts, and recommendations that we make can't just be across the board. We're gonna have to make sure that this, folks who need it the most are gonna get it most. Because otherwise, we're still gonna be in the same situation. Because if, the neighboring suburban district is also giving out bonuses, guess where they're going?
Well, it seems to me that if we're gonna do some sort of state money for pay for teachers and related professionals, then it ought to be targeted to where the shortages are most extreme, both in terms of districts and in terms of occupational categories.
Yes.
But that doesn't, that's a long way from getting to a real recommendation on that. We're not talking about are we talking about a minimum teacher salary at that point? Or are we talking about just more money that can be used for salaries?
You know, I think we probably did it very simply. In CAPS, we talked about elevating the profession. We talked about raising the teacher salaries. We didn't put a number in, but we talked about it. And we also knew that the state would deal with it according to the need of the economic need of the district, period. We did not target shortage areas. We did not target districts because the eastern part of the state is a desert too. And so we did not do that. We left it open and said it's across the board. And if you go to any superintendent right now, they will tell you that they have a shortage of special ed teachers, math teachers, science teachers, bilingual teachers, et cetera. You know, it gets very complicated, guys, to try to incentivize certain groups.
That's not a specific proposal. I mean, that's sort of a general parameters of that.
Yeah,
You know,
well,
I mean, you know, and I also, you know, thoroughly agree with Michelle on that, you know, to the extent we're doing this, we want to target special ed professions. That's what our mandate is.
And I will say again, I think we do the best we can, make recommendations and not just perseverate forever. And then the legislature's gonna do what it wants anyway.
Well,
So I would say that I would feel comfortable with saying the neediest areas, including related service with special education, because I really just sort of associate the two together. And if you have, I just don't think you should have a minimum salary. I think there should be just a stipend given by the state, has to be used for this specifically. It's not going to the town, it's going directly into these individual salaries, which they should have certifications on file, where they're working on file. Can go directly to their mailbox for all I care. I just think, again, if you give it to the town's gonna find something to do with it. And they cannot, in a contract, therefore, cut special ed salaries by how much they're getting elsewhere. I mean, that would have to be included in the language. Fran, do we have the ability to grab the CA recommendations, which I assume are like, and then the one from the municipalities and the one from
Yeah.
superintendent, and just like compare, like it would be useful. I know that we've always want to have a last meeting, we never seem to get to one.
Yeah.
But like, if we could see the common themes and say, our language is so close to this, it would be reinforcing if we could literally say to the legislature, we're all saying these things. Here's ones that are not. Here are the ones that we're all in agreement with.
I
As we
can
did
get
here.
you, I can get you mine, and I do believe CEA's is very
Yeah.
general as well.
Yeah.
yes, nothing in terms of
Specifics.
parameters for legislative action. Okay, can we, let's, in
We
the
do
interest
have
of time,
recommendations.
let's move on, because I'm not hearing consensus on this yet. But let's talk about how we can have more mandated training across the board,
Mandate.
right?
Yeah,
Right,
well, I
Patrice?
think Patrice had an issue with the mandate.
Sounds like Andy
not-
had a sign bill.
I admit this was the one meeting I missed, and apparently this was added in, but under number 3,
What?
eligibility recommendations. Item 3. As someone who has worked with representatives of a number of the people around this table for years around reducing annual professional development requirements imposed by the legislature on all staff, remembering that we're working with adult learners who we have reason to believe can retain knowledge for more than 4 months, we hope. I cannot, and we made progress last year, that a number of the professional development requirements are now only required at least once over a 5-year period. Districts can have their own standards that are higher than that. If they want to do annual professional development because they feel it's important in some of those areas, that's fine. But I cannot agree to a recommendation that adds a professional development mandate for all staff on an annual basis.
Well, if we took off the words on an annual basis, they need to be trained on this period.
You know, I have heard superintendents say that they have, and building principals say they have staff, they don't want trained in de-escalation because
Yeah.
they don't want them involved in it.
Right.
Exactly.
There's no training in the world that would make them an effective
Nope.
intervener. So no, I don't think all staff is. a-
And they
is
weren't
fully
hired for
required.
that.
Just the crisis
Exactly.
teams, the mandate was of crisis teams had to be.
Right.
Yeah,
Me too, though, of course, is why they're
I'm
there.
with Patrice on that one.
I'm thinking these people.
And we are, isn't it already the law that the school crisis team has to be trained?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so we don't,
Everything else is here already, right?
yes, we
Because
can
I'm fine with that.
eliminate it.
Eliminate 3 altogether?
Because it's already, part of
Already
we.
done.
Get done.
Right.
Yeah.
I see head nods. On this.
Well, I mean,
I'm quick.
As long as that language for the school's crisis team is already on the book, that's fine by me.
All right. I just have to disclose that I was kicked off that task force and therefore, that's why I'm hostile.
But you were always included and you always showed up.
You're not picked off. I showed up for the food.
Whatever.
Yeah, so, I would eliminate.
Okay.
Okay, so the 3's gone, okay. What other issues do we have? What was Mike Grove's issue?
Mike Groves was the
Health
medical insurance for paras being paid by the municipalities.
Where, is that in here?
Yeah.
Same.
That's Roman numeral for
Number one.
number one,
Wait.
lots of white dots.
The
Unfilled
third,
dots.
the third bullet.
Erased.
It's,
A bit of a.
third button, yeah. He said
We
not
just take that one out.
I mean, of all the salary ones, we have to have paras. I mean, they're.
Right, no, but I
The
mean,
health
not the health benefits and the minimum, and not the number.
But some people, and this doesn't make sense too, because some people pay by year and not by hour, so I guess it calculates to the same thing. Not sure what.
Don't you have salary negotiations with that? Don't you have contracts?
The paras,
Yeah.
it's,
Compare a contract.
they really need to be under the two-year contract because like, they're not getting
Yeah, I
any
mean-
representation in comparison to us.
Nothing.
They're reamed during negotiations.
Significant para shortage.
Oh,
The salaries that we pay for paras.
it's.
Right, and I've heard from special ed teachers, included in this session, that the lack of paras is one of the things that's making their job
That's
much harder.
I
That is
agree.
true. I agree. That is true. We have pages and pages of part-time people because we can't find full-time.
Or as districts don't pay full-time, because part-time's cheaper.
Sometimes, yeah, you're right, we do, if it makes sense, but you can't even find, I can't even find them.
Thank you, Billy.
You should see what we.
Is there any appetite, instead of removing health benefits for paras, to say that health benefits should be provided by the state for paraeducators?
I would love them to be able to buy in at a reduced rate, state, like. that
So
would
if
be
that's the
wonderful
case,
thing.
those districts who are already paying for them, then we're saying, hey, you're picking this up.
Yeah, and you know what? I think districts were very happy to get the assistance from the state with the 5 million from the legislature this year. Or I don't know if it came from the legislature, but it came from Sean Scanlon's office. And it was 5 million. Actually, it was probably 10 million this year, right? Because it was the original 5 plus 5 more. And I think it should be assistance from the state.
Not a provision, not a, like, you can buy. into
Well, the
system.
state didn't pay for the whole thing, but they gave districts money
What is that?
To give to staff.
to give
To give
to
to paras.
assist.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Well, they help pay for health
The
benefits.
health pay for it.
But that was a one-time payment, right? So like.
No, it's been, they gave, we had 2 years now where they did it for high
High
deductible. And then they really listened, and this year they did it for the state plan, and you didn't have to be high deductible. And for what I know, it's ongoing.
So we think it's
Yeah, I mean,
permanently in place as a funding mechanism.
well, I don't know if it's
None of it
permanent,
is
but
permanent.
I don't,
It's not
nothing's
like, you know,
permanent.
What is stopping them? The salaries is comparable way you can make it the gap. Actually, the gap's paid more usually, and oftentimes those come with health benefits. So if we're trying to compete like with like, and we need these people to stay, it's not that we just need them to come, we need them to stay.
Yeah.
I it's a population that's so in need of a rewrite. Their negotiations do not go like ours, and I would be very happy to set a minimum salary, whether you say it's per hour or per annual, and then, you know, hook to inflation or whatever you want to say, that we would never be caught unawares.
But the health benefits, like Mike Grove said, you know, it's $36,000 for a family. You know, it's somewhere in the 20s for a single, and they just can't afford it.
What do we want to say in this regard?
Maybe it's just another statement about the fact that we need to look at, you know, increasing funding for paraprofessionals. I don't think we actually know this third bullet, what this would actually look like. So it may just be another statement that we're making.
I hate it because of the time we're wasting.
I know.
Like, do we know what the minimum pay is right now? I mean, the state should have this data, right?
Well, a lot of districts, you know, start off at 16 an hour, some are at 17 an hour.
Yeah, that's why I would just.
They do, it's
Yeah, and so,
like minimum wage.
and you know, and a lot, you know, try to have paras under 32 hours so they don't pay health benefits.
And then salaries could be anywhere from like $28,000 to $34,000 a year. Annual.
Right.
Yeah. Which is enough for a family of four to exist for 1 month.
So we won't do a health benefit thing. I mean, I just feel like we could say we support a baseline of minimum, state minimum wage plus 5 or something. And then we can let them figure it out.
What if we said $25 and then, and continued assistance from the state on health benefits?
Did you expand it? Or expanded?
Yeah, expand, the assistance coming from the
But
contractual.
I'm just saying that maybe that money can't just be held in health benefits. Maybe there's just, I don't know, that's why I'm saying about some sort of cost, because I'm thinking, you know, if I were to increase the part-time para line to $25 per hour, that would be a significant increase. But if we're already paying for health benefits for full-time, is there a dollar amount that's not necessarily tied to a health benefit? That makes sense. Maybe it's a both and.
That would be the state would get involved in that.
Because if we're tying it, it should be, instead of health benefits, there's a dollar amount versus health benefits. Because there's some districts who are already paying health benefits for full time.
Amy has her hand up.
Amy,
Hey, everyone. So I happen to actually have 27 districts right here in front of me because I'm in the middle of para negotiations. And their minimum beginning wages, the minimum is 15, the maximum is 24. So 25 is like significantly higher than that. So I think you need to have that in the frame of reference when you're looking, but also for our frame of reference, you need to consider that every district considers paras differently, para educators differently, and there's different levels. So to have like a blanket, you're really kind of going collective bargaining, right? So I think you need to really think about collective bargaining when we're looking at this as well. That was my 2 cents.
Amy, does it differentiate on the contracts you're looking at what types of paras or duties, like if they're special education or?
Yes, and there's different levels and, you know, some districts, based on what your day-to-day duties are, you're considered, your rate of pay is maybe a little bit higher. Regular ed versus special ed, or special program versus not special program, or you're an RBT, or you're not an RBT, but I may be an RBT in this district and get a bonus or an extra stipend, and an RBT in this district and not. So you're really kind of stepping in some muddy waters, just putting that out there.
That's helpful.
Yeah, so it's the same thing, right? We get in the middle of a negotiated baseline versus give them.
I just look at it, you know, I look at it $25, right? And I think, what do they work, 6 hours a day? Right, all right, that's 150, 5 days, that's 750, it's 3,000 a month, and they work 10 months, it's $30,000. That's
It's not even.
That's
they're
not
all 5
even,
days.
living wage.
Oh, no.
That's all I'm saying. It's not a living wage. I mean, you know, I know it sounds like a lot more, but wow. If you really think about it, 30,000. It's not a heck of a lot of money.
That's why I think we should examine it. I just don't think it should be tied to health benefits.
No, I
Um,
agree with you on that.
It should be a dollar amount, but not necessarily tied to health
Yeah.
benefits.
But I also don't want it to be that wealthier districts that can pay the health benefits are gonna get these pairs.
Oh, that's
Right.
true too, but I'm thinking about on the other end, depending on how you're paying.
Right, it can be taken out of that.
That could be a significant impact too, so.
Yeah.
I think to Amy's point, Amy's bringing up that there's a lot of different kind of pay structures across, and we really don't have a handle on that and seeing kind of if we're making a recommendation, what's gonna be the implication for many districts, so. That's the piece.
Why don't we?
But I definitely think that they do need some more money.
Okay, that's
For me, work and eat.
We're gonna have to.
Work and
Work and eat, yeah.
work and eat.
we're gonna have to put. I think what we'll do now is recess for food, because that's always more important. And I will try to incorporate all the helpful suggestions here and get out a revised draft.
Did we take notes?
I think,
Oh,
He takes
We're
it.
Andy took his own notes in his
Yeah,
head.
I take some
He's
notes,
gonna
but
be
Michelle
on
takes
his
some,
notes.
Michelle takes
Oh,
great
I
notes.
just wondered.
Yeah.
I wanna make sure-
And Grant takes none.
And see what we can do in terms of wordsmithing and all that, on email. And get together if we have to, I guess we do have to see, to vote for a final set of recommendations. And I would also like suggestions as to whether there's other things that ought to be incorporated into this report, both in terms of proposals and also in terms of narrative language. Or, you know, we sort of have the narrative language in the findings report. Do we need to put that sort of stuff in again?
Why don't you attach the findings report as an appendix to this? Is that something we've all agreed to?
Yeah.
Yes.
But it will become separate and the legislators don't have a great system for keeping the
Yeah.
documents together. So make it easy for them, have it all.
Well, I was actually thinking doing the findings report and then having the recommendations at the end as have a single final report.
I would put the recommendations on.
Trust me, they don't read.
Okay, fine.
Sorry, if any legislators are listening.
We reached consensus to recess then?
And please, there's so much food. Help
Did you say we were
yourselves.
gonna meet again? We're gonna vote via email.
We're gonna try to do as much as we can by email, but I think we're gonna have a meeting again.
Can we set that now?
Yeah, we should.
Yeah.
We
In
should.
December?
I,
Christmas Eve.
I don't think we can do December.
Well, we're due January 1st, but the legislature doesn't convene till
They don't,
The eighth.
the 8th? Well, but I mean,
January 8th?
It's a long session. But remember, there is no task force submission police. So.
we certainly know that. But when, realistically, when do we have to get this to the legislature and have any effect?
The sooner the better, but if they know it's coming.
Yeah, so should we try by January 15th?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
we want to meet on the,
They could always raise the dummy bill too,
Exactly.
and then flush out the language after.
do we want to
Bill
meet
to
on the
reform
7th?
special education? Yeah.
Well, I mean, just
No, that's, I mean,
enacting
that's,
the recommendations of.
So
special
Tuesdays
education
when we
task
typically
force.
That's what I mean about them knowing.
Mondays are
it's
hard.
coming.
Yeah.
Well, I
I
said.
have a
very-
hold in my
I-
calendar for January 7th already.
We already had it.
Yeah, I actually do have it already.
We have a meeting scheduled for the 7th.
What?
January 7th?
Seven. You
I
don't
have
have
from
enough
9:30 to
time.
11:30.
Right, apparently. I
I'll
don't.
block up the whole day.
I'm not here,
Dawn sent it out.
Oh, you're not here?
not here.
Oh,
January
but we
7th.
have it then.
Could we do, any chance you could do January 8th?
It's the beginning day of the session.
Oh, who
So
cares?
there's, who cares? Well,
you want to be up?
I can't do the 6th or 7th.
Can we do the following week?
Yeah,
That's gonna be close though, right?
You know what? They're not reading this the first day they're up there.
Well, they're up to the 8th. And we want to hand it in on the 15th, so we're not going to.
I think that if you miss that 15th, if you even push that back a few weeks, it's not gonna make a big difference.
Sort of the 14th. We're looking
If we could meet the 13th, and I'm hoping that before that, we can do most of it on email.
All right, the 13th.
Is the 13th
at-
work?
so we
Morning.
put it in, but
I appreciate it.
I don't know if
Thank
that
you.
counts.
Are we doing the 9 to 12 again?
Yeah.
Yeah, make it long.
Nice.
You get it done.
You're- I'm sorry, you're looking at Monday, the
January
13th?
13th from
Yeah.
9 to 12?
And we're canceling the 7th.
Yeah.
Just a note, Fran, so those Mondays are conflicts for me, but that's okay. This works for the group.
Yeah,
Oh,
I would prefer that, we lost a lot of people by meeting on a Monday this
Yeah.
time, so I'm just worried about Mondays.
Well, we could do Tuesday, the 14th.
14th is better for me.
Would you prefer that?
Yes.
Okay,
9 to 12.
9 to 12?
Yeah, okay.
Can't be here.
That's okay.
Thank you for
It'll be a-
not doing the 7.
Listen, I don't think.
No. It looks like I know Amy's off, but it looks like Concase has a board meeting on Tuesday, the 14th from 8:30 to 10:30.
Who does that involve?
That'll be Amy
Yeah, that's Amy.
but maybe she could join right after at 10:30.
Are you available then, Michelle?
I mean, right now I have a hearing scheduled that day, but I'm hoping it's gonna be off.
Well, we could do 10 to 1. Yeah, you want to do 10 to 1?
That's better for me.
Huh?
Or 10, what time's the? kind of thing,
10:30? How about 10:30 to 1?
About 11 to 1.
How about 11 to 1? Even better.
Say 11 to 2. I mean,
11 to 2, 11 to 2. 11 to 2.
All right, 11 to 2
On the 14th.
14th.
on the 14th. Okay.
Brian, one more question, one substantive question.
Just updated.
You
Okay.
were, the legislature asked you to look at, costs of excess costs if it were 3 times,
Thank you.
or 2 times. Did the department ever do anything on that?
I'd have to go back and check in with that with our performance office and fiscal office. There was a lot of information and data shared, but I'd have to check on that.
Please do, because that's obviously relevant to our recommendations.
Yeah,
Okay,
I can bring back data for you.
please help yourself to lunch. It's right outside and there's so much that you ought to bring it home for dinner too.
To replace the Thanksgiving leftovers.
Yeah, 2 weeks. Here's these.
So we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks, everyone.
Please help yourselves.
Thank you.
It's right outside the door.
Collate the CA